Destiny. It's got magic subclasses, it's got 4 of them, and we've already covered introductory videos for 3 of those. Now it's time for the final guide, Stasis, the subclass where all of this really began. For those unaware, I recently began making new player's guides for the revamped Light 3.0 subclasses released throughout the past 3 seasons. These guides are meant to serve as a primer for people unfamiliar with Destiny's terms and general gameplay ecosystem. They aren't all encompassing compendiums, but rather everything you need to know to get your feet wet and dive in by yourself. And while I do recommend watching those 3 videos if you haven't already, you don't have to if you don't want to. These guides are written in such a way that you can consume it individually and watch only what you need to. But anyway, Stasis. Released all the way back in November 2020, this was the first Darkness subclass that players ever got access to. It broke the game and laid the foundation for what we have now with every current subclass. But enough of the fun facts, let's get right into the meat of the video. As I've mentioned in the past 3 videos, every subclass in Destiny has its own flavor or personality that defines it and how it plays. Arc was all about speed and aggression, Solar about burning and healing, and Void had a lot of things going for it, but explosions, invisibility, and a lot of other stuff. And Stasis is all about freezing and crowd control, a lot more defensive measures rather than pure lethality. Now, there are 3 constructive pillars that make up the Subclass 3.0 system and how it functions: Verbs, Aspects, and Fragments. Let's start with Verbs one more time. Verbs are the keywords and status effects that make up a subclass. In the subclass menu, they are represented as the words highlighted in blue. For Stasis, there are 5 of these verbs: Slow, Freeze, Shatter, Stasis Crystals, and Stasis Shards. Again, these are 5 different status effects, or mechanics, if you would like to call it that make up Stasis as a whole and what it can do. Starting with our first verb, Slow can be applied in a variety of ways. In this case, we will use the Duskfield Grenade to do it. When you apply the Slow debuff to an enemy, their movement, abilities, and accuracy are all negatively impacted. While this is happening, they will start to accumulate slow stacks. Reach 100 slow stacks, and that target will become frozen. Speaking of which, that leads us into our second verb immediately, Freeze. Freeze is exactly how it sounds. There are multiple ways to apply it, as with everything for every subclass, but slow stacks is one such method. When someone or something is frozen, they are unable to move for a period of time. The specific length of time depends on the enemy type and whether you're playing PvE or PvP, but they will unfreeze over time, and real players can forcibly break out of it. But it makes you a really big target. Now, if you deal enough damage to an enemy that is already frozen, and do it before they unfreeze, they will shatter, which, funnily enough, is our third verb. Isn't it kind of neat how all of these things work together? It's almost like it's planned that way. Now, shattered enemies take a large amount of damage and also deal shatter damage to any enemies around them. You can even use this to spread slow to other enemies, or even just freeze larger groups after killing just one. Our last 2 verbs are technically verbs, but they're also more of just things you can physically interact with and do different things with. So first off, Stasis Crystals. Stasis Crystals are literally just giant crystals of stasis. There are multiple ways of spawning them, but the easiest would be to simply use the Glacier Grenade. Stasis Crystals can slow or freeze enemies that get struck by it, and you can even shoot the Stasis Crystals to shatter them and deal damage. And our final verb, Stasis Shards, are these small little floating bits of stasis energy you can spawn, and collecting them gives melee energy back to you. Again, there are multiple ways to spawn these, but they can be used for other things, and we will go over that later. And that about wraps up the verbs. Stasis is rather simple. You slow and freeze things so you can shatter things to slow and freeze more things. Glad we're on the same page, or at least I hope we are. But moving on to our second pillar of the subclass system, Aspects. So, if verbs were the building blocks of how the subclass worked, then aspects are the skeleton of what you can do. You see these 2 boxes right here? These are your aspect slots. These are basically something you can equip that determines the core abilities that you have access to. Currently, there are 4 stasis aspects for each class, Warlock, Hunter, and Titan respectively, and you can equip up to 2 aspects at a time. Once again, for the sake of simplicity, I'm only going to give an example of 1 aspect from each class. This should give you an idea of the things aspects can do, hopefully without overwhelming you. Warlocks, you're up first today. Arguably one of, if not the best stasis ability in the game, you have access to Bleak Watcher. Now, Bleak Watcher as an aspect lets you convert your grenade into a stasis turret that automatically shoots at enemies for you, slowing and freezing them. Put it wherever you want and the turret will do its job. It is one fantastic ability. And Hunters, the aspect I'm going to show you is Winter's Shroud. A very simplistic aspect, but not without its uses. Essentially, every time you dodge, you will slow nearby enemies. That's all it does, but considering how short your dodge cooldown is alongside the rest of your kit, you could be slowing and freezing enemies all of the time. In Titans, your aspect for today is Cryoclasm. After sprinting for a short time, Cryoclasm will charge up a stronger slide that sends you further and faster on the ground. Additionally, you can use the slide to instantly shatter any stasis crystals or frozen enemies around you in a somewhat large area. These are just a few examples of the aspects, but I hope they gave a brief look at the things you can expect them to do. Some augment your abilities or even give movement tech, some are complicated, and some are rather simple. But there's one last thing that aspects do that leads into our final pillar. You see, every aspect has a number of what we call fragment slots. Now, the stronger the aspect, the less fragment slots it typically has, and vice versa. Now, what are fragments? Well, fragments are a series of small augments or buffs that you can equip. They aren't overly strong or broken individually, but when combined with other fragments or your aspects, they can become very potent. Let's give a few examples. So right here we have the Whisper of Fissures fragment. It's a pretty straightforward choice. Having this equipped increases the damage and size of any stasis burst when you kill a frozen target or break any stasis crystal. It's just a passive effect that makes your stasis explosions better. But there are also fragments with additional benefits and even some negatives. The Whisper of Chains fragment, for example, gives you increased damage resistance anytime you stand next to a stasis crystal or frozen target, while also buffing your recovery stat. The recovery stat, by the way, dictates how quickly your health regenerates. On the opposite end of that spectrum, the Whisper of Bonds fragment gives you super energy for killing frozen targets, but you lose some of your discipline and intellect stat. Discipline dictating how quickly your grenade recharge, and intellect dictating how quickly your super recharges. I hope this illustrates the wide variety of options that Fragments, and by proxy the whole 3.0 subclass system, provides you. You can pretty much just equip whatever you want to try and find a playstyle within that subclass that suits you. Okay, so before I lose you, let's recap. Verbs are the building blocks, the words, the definitions that describe a subclass. For Stasis, it's all about freezing. Aspects are your core abilities. These are the things that make Warlocks, Hunters, and Titans unique, what you can do and what you can't. And Fragments are passive augments you can slot on top of all of this to micromanage your playstyle, to give you an additional edge. These three things work in tandem to create the subclass experience, and there really is no right or wrong answer to what you choose to equip. There were several things I didn't mention, however. Each class has a variety of different jumps and supers and grenades you can choose from, but I didn't mention this because I think you should just try them all out and pick what you like. This guide is more of a primer meant to introduce people into the ecosystem. It's up to you to take that extra step. Do a bit of reading, a bit of experimenting, and get what you want out of it. I'm just here to serve as your guide. But with all of that being said, I'm out of time for now. Thank you so much for watching and for the support. Check out some of my other videos if you'd like. Leave a like, dislike, comment, sub, whatever you want, and I will see you beautiful people next time.